Buckle up, Buttercup. It's time for class.
Housing prices just hit an all-time high, and millennials who don't own one of these now probably never will, because the market is red hot again. And it has millennials asking, who's buying all these houses? How are people paying these prices? Who has that kind of money? Well, it's not us. It's Wall Street and investors. They want to own it all so that you can't own any of it. Buckle up, grab some ice, because this one's going to make your blood boil. In order to understand the homeless millennial story, we have to go back to the early 2000s, when super risky mortgages were offered to the public by the biggest banks in the world. And at the time, banks knew that people couldn't pay back these loans, but they didn't care, because they would lump these toxic loans in with other loans in a new financial product that made them a lot of money, called a mortgage-backed security. Think of a mortgage-backed security as a bowl full of apples. Banks grouped toxic loans with stable loans, with the idea that a few bad apples could be easily sold to investors if they were lumped in with good apples and sold as a bunch. And Wall Street did this for about 10 years, until 2008, where virtually every bunch of apples contained nothing but rotten mortgages. And when borrowers stopped being able to pay back on those loans, banks were left holding the bill, and it forced a massive panic sell-off in the markets, which triggered a financial collapse that spilled into every corner of the economy. Businesses went under, people lost their jobs, people lost their homes, and the entire housing market crashed. But there was one group that got away completely unscathed: the big banks that caused the crash with the invention of mortgage-backed securities in the first place. They got bailed out by the government and the Federal Reserve, who printed trillions of dollars in order to add liquidity to the economy, to create an environment that was more friendly for the banks, and also to help lower interest rates. And the printing of all that cash that began in 2008 were the first ripples of the tsunami of inflation that we are all experiencing today in 2023. But the story gets worse, because all of that happened at the exact same time that the government got into the business of loaning money to young students going to college. And colleges saw this as an opportunity to cash in on billions. Because when the government is loaning young kids money to pay for their college tuition, colleges thought to themselves, well, why don't we just charge more for this? And that's exactly what universities did, which turned higher education into a for-profit business. So between these three seemingly unrelated events, the financial crisis in 2008, the bailing out of the large banks that caused the crisis in the first place, and the government subsidization of higher education, the perfect storm for a homeless generation of millennials was created. Because for over a decade, millennials were saddled with unprecedented debt. They carried overpriced degrees into a broken economy. All the while, interest rates were held at artificially low levels, as the government and the Federal Reserve continued to print brand new money into existence. And they did that to support the big Wall Street banks that caused the problems in the first place. And the irony here is that all this extra cash in the system and the low interest rates on houses actually worked. It made monthly mortgages on homes much cheaper. And despite the fact that all this extra cash in the system did drive up home values into the early and mid-2010s, mortgages actually became more affordable month to month for the average borrower. So much so that the average mortgage was actually cheaper than what it cost to rent in most places in the United States. But millennials were saddled with debt, working minimum wage jobs with expensive degrees that they had to pay for. And those millennials, even though they were making their rent every month, didn't qualify for the cheaper mortgages. But you know who did qualify? The same investment banks and Wall Street hedge funds that caused the financial collapse in 2008 in the first place. The same bad actors that keep getting off scot-free time after time after time. Not to mention their government counterparts who helped them out of these sticky situations in the first place, because there's probably some shady dealings going back and forth between Washington and Wall Street during all of this. You can't tell me there's not. Because in 2023, BlackRock and other big investors are back in the market, scooping up homes at or above asking, driving prices to new all-time highs. And this is why there will be no housing collapse, because this time the housing crisis is one of unaffordability. The millennials who already are in homes have homes with low interest rates and mortgages that are cheaper to service than it costs to rent. They're not going to default, and prices are just going to keep climbing as investment companies fight with each other for existing inventory, and the government won't do anything about it, because they already have. They bailed out Wall Street. They helped the people that created this environment in the first place. Nothing the government has done over the past 10 to 15 years has in any way benefited the American people. It's only benefited created the 1% ruling class that helps carve out deals in Washington in the first place. And it almost feels like all of this was done on purpose, because if you just think about it for a minute, the government encouraged you to take out massive amounts of debt to pay for higher education that you were promised would lead to a brighter future. They knew that there would be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of students that took out that debt that would never be able to pay it back. And the one detail that was conveniently left out of every student loan program was the fact that student loans can never be forgiven. Also, that you could get a degree that wound up being worthless when you entered a workforce in an economy that was in ruins. And the government made all of this happen with printed money, ensuring that the money that you did manage to save wouldn't go as far as it did for your parents. Because if you want to rig a game in favor of the ruling class, the top 1%, and rig it against the masses at the bottom, that's exactly how any smart, intelligent person would do it. And we, the people on Main Street, didn't notice any of this happening because we've all been too busy arguing about the color of our skin, our pronouns, the definition of what a woman is in the first place, and whether or not killing unborn babies in the womb should be an undeniable human right. So just to clarify, no, I'm not saying that all of this was done on purpose, but I am saying if you wanted to intentionally strengthen the ruling class and weaken the masses to the point that they don't have any options left, this is exactly how you would make that happen. Just think about it.